Husband's been secretly working on a second life in another city, planning to disappear, and I didn't figure it out because I'm clever or snoopy or suspicious. I figured it out because my job is to notice where things go and where they shouldn't. I'm Myra, 33, a cartographer who builds maps for a living and spends too much time staring at satellite tiles until the world resolves into patterns you can't unsee. And the first pattern in my house wasn't lipstick or late nights, it was a courier label on a cardboard tube tucked behind our coat rack, a neat return address from a storage company in a city 5 hours north where neither of us has relatives, and my body did that small, efficient calculation it learned in field school: distance, direction, why here, and then I slid the tube out from behind the coats as if I were removing a secret from the wall without altering the paint. I tell you now, I did not open it right away. I set it on the dining table and went to make tea because hot water is the only tool I respect as much as a scale bar. The tube just sat there like a road I hadn't added to the map yet. My husband, Joel, is 36, a music teacher who collects folk instruments and calls them by their first names as if they're old friends. He's got the kind of smile that makes bus drivers tell him about their grandchildren. He did not look like someone with an alternate zip code for his soul. The tube said otherwise. When the kettle clicked, I went back and twisted the cap. Inside was a rolled printout, a floor plan. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, small balcony, galley kitchen, an arrow pointing north which made me snort because who labeled this thoughtfulness? In the corner, a stamp with the building's name, Harborview Residences, and a handwritten note, "For final walkthrough, Unit 402. The date was next month. Under it, a neat list in Joel's beloved block capitals: couch, bed, dishes, plants. The question marks were small. The certainty sat in the absence of any question next to key pickup. Maps have layers: terrain, roads, water, labels. People do too. I'd been zoomed out for months admiring the cheerful topography of our life. The ugly couch that somehow forgave our bad posture, the plant he named Banjo that leaned toward the window as if it knew a secret, the Saturday market where we always argued about which stall had the honest tomatoes. Zoom in far enough and you see the culverts, the fences, the little footpaths people make when the pavement is wrong. That floor plan was a desire path printed on nice paper. I put the print back in the tube, capped it, slid it behind the coats exactly as I'd found it. I am not noble. I am a person who did not want to confront him with a single piece of evidence and lose all the other roads I might need. That night he came home humming, kissed my cheek, asked about my day in that gentle way I fell for, a man who assumes there's an answer. I told him about a dataset with mislabeled streams and he said, "The river's always right, it's the map that's wrong," which would be romantic if I weren't holding a wrong map of my marriage in my ribs. I began to see the pattern in his pockets. A keyring tag from a co-working space in that same city. A user's manual for a mid-century coffee maker we don't own. A paper stub from a gym called Meridian. I run my finger along borders for a living. These were borders. When you map long enough, you know the earth doesn't lie. The lines we draw try to keep up with what dirt and water already decided. He had drawn a line and walked it. People ask why I didn't say something immediately. Because timing is a kind of projection. You choose the coordinate system for the conversation, or the conversation chooses you. I needed anchors. I needed to know whether I was about to fight a mirage or a city. I found the mailbox registration 2 days later in the glove compartment while I was looking for the toll tag. Not my proudest moment. I wasn't rifling with fury, I was tidying. It slips under your skin, that urge to align. The card was from a private mailroom in the same neighborhood as Harborview. His name, his alias, J. Harper, and a small P.O. box number that looked frankly harmless. People who want to disappear don't often choose harmless details. They choose details that are easy to say without waking the house. "Long day?" he asked that evening, noticing the way I stood at the sink like a soldier guarding an invisible bridge. "Long," I said. I could have said, "Tell me why you registered a mailbox under another version of yourself." I could have said, "Explain the tube behind our coats." Instead, I asked him about the high school choir because their recital was next week and because if people walked around narrating their betrayals on schedule, my job would be to draw cartoon rain clouds on the atlas. I told my sister first, because you never go into the field alone if you can help it. Her name is Lena, 30, a paramedic who carries her kindness like a sturdy bag and isn't stingy about it. We sat in her kitchen. I unrolled the map in the story and she did not tell me I was being dramatic. She traced the floor plan with one finger as if checking where a stretcher would fit. "Do you want to know or do you want not to know?" she asked. She wasn't being clever. She was asking how much light I could stand. "I want to know," I said, "because the worst thing in the world is to decide later you should have looked and the road washed out while you were rehearsing your dignity." I did not hack his accounts. I did not put a tracker on his car. I did what I know how to do. I built a timeline. On paper. With pens because pens don't crash. Date of mailbox. Date of gym membership. Date on the keyring tag. Date on the floor plan. They clustered around 3 months, a season where I'd been swallowed by a project and he'd been swallowed by his own weather. My map took shape, points becoming a line becoming an intention. I was sure I'd find the storage next, because new lives need duplicates of old objects. I was right. A receipt fell out of a library book, Margaret Atwood essays, which would be hilarious if irony softened chairs, and there it was, Unit 124A Harbour Lock Storage, paid through the end of the year. I do not recommend that feeling, holding a form that proves your life has a cousin you were never introduced to. I didn't go alone. Lena came with me because she knows about rooms with air that turns to soup. We stood at the counter pretending we were winter coats and they gave us a visitor pass because I told them we'd lost our key. The manager believed me because my face is the kind that makes cashiers double-check a discount and hand me a tissue. We walked down a row to 124A and I knocked before I opened it, even though that's absurd. Coal dust and resin and the sound of a life breathing when it thinks no one is listening. 2 chairs, a folded rug, boxes with labels that made my palms sweat purely from their orderliness. Kitchen starter, books, J. Winter, and a long thin box with instruments, careful written in his block caps. He hadn't moved much. He had moved enough. The ugliest box said documents. Inside, a lease packet with his neat initials on 2 pages, a blank for the final signature, and an email printed out with a subject that sounded like a lullaby. "Welcome home, Joel." I took a photo. I didn't take anything else. I closed the door. Lena leaned against the corrugated wall and stared at a rust spot for so long it became a universe. "Okay," she said. "Now you know." I drove us home with my hands at 10 and 2 like I was taking a test. When we got there, I found him on the couch with Banjo the plant and a mandolin in his lap and a recipe open on his phone for a lemon tart he'd never attempted but had talked about for years. He looked up at me with that open, guileless face he uses to ask the world to please remain gentle. I put the keys on the hook and said, "We need to talk," in a voice I used last when a backcountry storm came in wrong and we had to choose between 2 bad paths. What you imagine happened. It didn't. I didn't throw the floor plan at him. I didn't list the unit numbers. I didn't cross-examine. I Saturday. He Saturday. My mouth surprised me with its tenderness. "Tell me where you're going," I said. His shoulders had the decency to collapse. He touched the mandolin string like it was a rosary. "I'm a coward," he said. It should have made me furious. It made me sad because it was the first true thing in the room. "No," I said, "because I am compulsive about labels. Cowards run. You've been building a runway." I slid the tube out from where I'd tucked it under the chair. His eyes did not widen. They softened. He had not wanted to hide. He had wanted to avoid the part where he watched me watch him become someone else. He told me about Harbor View. He told me about the first time he Googled short lease furnished, and the way his body reacted to the possibility of a door he could close without anyone knocking. He told me about a co-working space that smells like new carpet and coffee and possibility. He told me he picked a mailbox because he wanted to collect letters that didn't begin with "we." He told me nothing about another woman, and for 30 seconds my lungs tried to write a kinder story. He was leaving for air, not for a person. Then he said her name, Rowan. He didn't say affair. He didn't say love. He didn't say only messages. He didn't have to. The map had already argued me into the right conclusion. Rowan lives in that city. She and Joel met in a summer music workshop 2 years ago, my project summer, the one I was proud of, which made me wince like cheap dental work. He'd stayed in touch, accidentally at first, he said, then on purpose, then in a way that required rooms that had other people's names on the lease. We meet at a cafe by the river, he offered like trivia. I stood, walked to the window, put my hand on Banjo's ridiculous leaves. I don't remember deciding to forgive my plant for leaning toward light. I remember deciding not to apologize for wanting the same. People want the confrontation to be clean. It wasn't. I asked stupid questions I already knew the answers to because saying them out loud makes your blood pick a temperature. Did you kiss her? Yes. Did you sleep with her? Not yet. Do you love her? His face did something complicated, and the answer hid in the movement. Are you leaving me? His mouth opened and trained for the truth. I was planning to, he said, and the past tense felt like a rope I had to decide whether to pick up. Okay, I said. Here's what happens now. It sounded cold. It was clarity dressed up safely. You call her while I listen and you say the word stop. You email your storage unit and tell them you're closing it. You send the lease back unsigned. You block the mailbox re-forwarding and you give me the key. After that we sit inside the crater and decide if we plant anything or put up a plaque that says this is where something burned. He stared at me like I had offered him a parachute and a shovel and told him to choose. Okay, he said, small as a thumbprint. He called her. I've never liked speakerphone. It makes voices sound like they're in a hallway. Her hello came warm and low and rueful, and I understood in a flash that felt both generous and traitorous why a man who makes harmonies for a living would walk toward that sound. He wasn't brave, he wasn't cruel, he was exhausted, which is the breed of unkindness people will forgive if you cry in the right places. He said the thing he needed to say. I can't do this, he said, collapsing 4 rooms into one sentence. She was quiet and then said, I thought so, and there was a goodbye in it and also an accusation, and then the line did that empty buzz phones do when a connection evaporates. We cancelled the storage that night. Joel stared at the close account page as if the internet would stand up and clap. I wrote the email because I write when I am afraid. My sentences come out like fence posts to hold up the field. He forwarded the lease back to Harbor View with a short, honest note. He pulled the mailbox key from his pocket and set it on the table like an animal. If you think that fixed anything, you have not replaced a bridge in spring. The river had not stopped. We had just agreed not to build this version of the crossing. He slept on the couch because the bed wanted history and neither of us could provide it without flinching. I lay on my side staring at the tiny cracks in the ceiling paint the way I used to stare at coastlines on old maps where the ink bleeds into the sea. In the morning I called a therapist my friend swears by, a woman who asks hard questions without making you feel like you're failing her class. I also called a lawyer not because I wanted a divorce at breakfast, but because I believe in knowing where the exits are before you light a match. Counseling was ugly and useful. The therapist asked him to tell the story of when he started believing that disappearing was kinder than disappointing me. He said, when the music was the only place I felt indispensable, and I hated him for the romance in the word indispensable, and then I hated myself for understanding that feeling exactly. She asked me to tell the story of when I stopped making invitations and started making maps for 2. I said, when my projects lasted longer than our jokes, and Joel cried the way men cry when they finally hear their own echo. We drew our marriage like a map on butcher paper. The big rivers we kept fordable, the little creeks we stepped over without naming, the hills we pretended were scenic but were in fact barriers. We circled places that felt hospitable and crossed out the false shortcuts we kept taking, him into silence where he convinced himself his good intentions were a passport, me into competence where I convinced myself my patience counted as intimacy. We wrote a legend in the corner. Blue, grief. Green, repair. Red, damage done on purpose. Yellow, lights that stayed on even when the grid went down. There were more yellow marks than I expected. We wrote banjo next to the window and both laughed and then hated that we were laughing and then liked it because laughter is a human way of agreeing the present still exists. People will tell you that staying makes you a saint or leaving makes you a hero. Both can be true and neither is required. I kept living in my house and he kept showing up in the kitchen even when showing up made him look like a man building his own stocks in the village square. He sent me texts that didn't ask for forgiveness but reported on the work someone does when they stop being the main character in their day, cancelled storage. Returned mandolin he bought with her at the second-hand shop, yep. He stopped being charming on purpose. He let himself be practical. It looked better on him than I expected. I wrote a letter to Rowan I never sent. I wrote it to empty my mouth of words that would rot there. It said, I understand. I don't forgive you. I don't need to. Please find light that doesn't require turning off other people's electricity. Then I threw it away because I am not in her story. I am in mine. There were strange mercies. A week later, out of habit, he stopped in front of the music store where he had almost bought a smaller guitar for the apartment that was no longer waiting. He came home with drumsticks instead and handed them to me very solemnly and said, "For the anger." We banged on the couch together until Banjo shed a leaf and we apologized to a plant, and I realized we were going to be ridiculous sometimes and that might be salvageable. We made rules, not forever rules, weather rules. He told me when an urge to vanish came over him. He said, "I want to disappear," out loud, and it sounded like a child describing a monster under the bed, and the monster shrank. I told him when a memory of him packing in secret hit like a wave. I didn't weaponize it, I told him so he could pass the towel. We had a weekly map night where we drew a future for 7 days only, with 2 wild cards and 1 obligation each. We learned what enough felt like. I stopped auditing every hour for evidence of loyalty. That's no way to inhabit a town. He stopped performing remorse like theater. Remorse needs chores. Do we get a happy ending? We get a true one for now. He kept teaching. I kept mapping a floodplain that will save a neighborhood 10 years from now. He recommitted to a local music program and I watched him watch a 9-year-old find the harmony line in Down in the River to Pray. And I did not think about Rowan because sometimes the present is persuasive. 3 months after the tube, we went to the city he'd almost moved to. Not as pilgrims to the shrine of what almost was, but as 2 people who can walk past a door they could have entered without turning into stone. We ate lunch by the river at a different cafe, the one I chose because choosing matters. We didn't talk about the apartment building with the harbor name or the gym with more glass than kindness. We talked about how someone had installed a public piano under a plane tree and how people took turns, and how the best maps are the ones that give you choices you want to take. Sometimes I still wake up and feel the weight of his other key in the room. I reach under the pillow for nothing and tell my body it is safe to calm down. He turns in his sleep and says my name without knowing, and I take the gift even if it's accidental. Sometimes I picture the alternate couch that isn't ours and the fork drawer that isn't mine, and I feel a flare of anger that tastes like metal. I let it chew a little, then I feed it breakfast and it goes quiet. If you're listening because you found your own cardboard tube, literal or figurative, and your palms won't stop sweating, here's the only thing I know that sounds like a step. Decide whether you want to know enough to draw a better map, and if you do, make a timeline and call a friend who carries a bag full of kindness and practicalities and put everything on the table where you eat. Ask for verbs, not adjectives. Ask for actions you can photograph. Put dates beside promises. Ensure a key changes hands if a key has been the weapon. Don't let them call silence bravery or erasure kindness. When a person says, "I'm a coward," do not congratulate them for their insight. Ask them what they will do tomorrow at 9 a.m. that a coward would not. I cannot swear we will last. The earth shifts under maps and you update or you become a pretty lie. I can tell you that today I am sitting at our table with a pencil behind my ear and he is in the other room arguing with a mandolin about a chord, and Banjo is angling toward the window again, and the light on the floor looks like a path you invent by walking, and there is no tube behind our coats, and the only storage unit we pay for is the one in my head where I keep the version of us who almost tripped and did not fall all the way because one of us looked down and said, "I see the edge," and the other said, "I'm here," and both of those sentences were true at the same time. Tonight we'll map a week. Nothing heroic. Pastor on Wednesday, my sister on Friday, laundry that will pretend to be an emergency Sunday night. He'll ask if I want to learn a simple drum pattern so I stop punishing the couch. I'll ask if he wants to learn how to read a topo line so he stops thinking hills are walls. We will be two people who walked past an apartment they didn't rent and went home together and opened all the doors they could inside the place with our names on the lease. And if he ever starts gathering boxes again, I will hear the tape rip against the cardboard from 2 rooms away, and I will not be polite about it. I will turn on every light and say, "Tell me where you're going," or set the box down, and he will have to choose with the entire weight of the house watching. And if one day the map changes again, if the river decides a new route and my careful lines go obsolete, I will still know how to stand somewhere and take a bearing and say this is north and that is not, and my feet are mine, and I can get from here to there without vanishing. That, in the end, is the only promise I make to myself: no disappearing, not for love, not from it, not into it. If he wants a second life, he can tell me with his whole mouth, and we will draw it together or we will draw apart, but he does not get to plan my absence on lined paper like a grocery list and call it mercy. I am here. I am on the map. I am not a dashed trail through someone else's legend.